Hello, I'm Katy Haye and welcome to my book nook. I love reading fantasy, I love writing fantasy, and I have a short story to share with you today. It's a folklore tale from Nordin in the Firethorn Kingdoms entitled Tears of Ice. Many long years ago, when Nordin was young, the king and queen had two sons. Twin boys born on the same day, they looked very different. Torvan, the firstborn, arrived in the world with a shock of bright curly hair that looked as though he'd brought the sun with him. Soldar was smaller, his hair paler and without his brother's curl. Both boys were strong and healthy, and the kingdom celebrated their arrival. The boys were taught together, and over the years became adept at politics, sword fighting, and hunting with spears. When they turned 18, the king and queen allowed them to spend more time with those ladies of the court judged suitable candidates for marriage. Both princes made love matches with clever and beautiful ladies. The kingdom feasted for a week following their double marriage at the age of 21. A few years later, the old king died. Torvan, now father of a young son and baby daughter, became king. Soldar knew his father's death must transform his life. His carefree youth was over, and he wished to live a full life away from his brother's shadow. With his wife and baby son, he moved away to a fine house set deep in the forests in the far north of the kingdom. From there he explored the land, hoping to discover the truth behind stories of creatures of magic that lived hidden deep in the woods. Sometimes he found footprints that matched no known beast, or heard strange cries in the night, but he never found the proof he craved. A few short years later, disaster struck. Plague swept through the kingdom. Soldar returned from a journey into the far forests to discover his wife and son both fearfully sick. Physicians were summoned, and he tended his wife and son himself, but they died a day apart, breathing their last in his arms. Soldar wept and petitioned the gods that he might also sicken and join his family, but he received no answer to his wishes. The plague retreated, leaving him untouched. Soldar couldn't bear to remain in the house where he'd lost his beloved wife and son. He travelled to the capital to visit his brother, hoping the company of family might ease his aching heart. Many in the capital had also lost their lives, but the plague had spared King Torvan and his family. At first, Soldar was pleased, but as time passed, grief turned to bitter resentment. Why should the king keep all, when he'd lost everything? King Torvan and his family were kind and welcoming to the grieving Prince Soldar, but their kindness only angered him further. He didn't want hugs from his nephews and niece. He wanted to embrace his son. He didn't want smiles from his sister-in-law. He wanted kisses from his own wife. Anger became a canker in his breast, depriving him of sleep, robbing his appetite, and turning him half mad. The king summoned healers to help his suffering brother, but no cures worked. Finally, the king himself suggested a hunt. He hoped to recapture the lost days of their youth and remind his brother that life still held happiness and purpose. Soldar agreed willingly. Perhaps his evil intentions had already formed, but perhaps he genuinely hoped to throw off his grief and experience joy once more. As he swung into the saddle, he smiled, and King Torvan hoped that the day would signal the beginning of the end of his brother's sadness. The two rode together into the forest and soon found the trail of a boar. They tracked and hunted, chatting together of the old days. Soldar seemed much recovered, and Torvan had no reason not to be happy. Generosity overflowed, and when the boar was brought to bay, the king stepped back. "Strike the killing blow, and we'll feast together tonight, brother," he declared, offering the moment of triumph to Soldar. Soldar's hands sweated on the haft of his spear. The king's words had brought home to him what he had lost. He didn't want to feast with his brother and the court. He wanted to celebrate with his own family, but that was impossible. He saw Torvan's smiling face, and all the rage and grief in his heart found its target. Torvan's generosity and forbearance twisted in his mind to patronizing aid for a helpless little brother. At the last moment he swung and drove his spear deep into his brother's chest. He watched Torvan's lifeblood spill onto the forest floor, saw his eyes dull, and Soldar's grief finally relented. He'd taken everything from his brother, just as everything had been taken from him. Relief from the pain that had gripped him made him smile, while his brother bled to death. But there was magic indeed in the ancient forest. As the blood of a brother betrayed touched the leaves of the forest plants, a curse sprang to life. Soldar had behaved like a monster, and the magic of the forest sank beneath his skin and changed him into a monster for real, although his outward appearance remained unchanged. His heart hardening with dark magic, Prince Soldar returned to the palace. Adding lies to the betrayal he'd already committed, he sorrowfully told the queen and her children that King Torvan had been gored to death by the boar. The widow fell to her knees, gathering her children in her arms, all three of them weeping. Soldar promised to look after them all and rule in his brother's place, since his son was yet too young for the responsibility of kingship. The queen asked to see her husband's body to prepare it for burial. Soldar replied that he'd buried Torvan in the forest, that his injuries made him unfit to be seen. The queen sensed something was wrong, but her love for family was so strong it didn't occur to her that Soldar himself could have killed his own brother. That night, Soldar discovered the price he was cursed to pay for the murder of a brother. He woke from his sleep with a terrible thirst. Summoning a servant to bring him wine, he found the liquid did nothing to slake his thirst. As the maid bent to refill his goblet, his attention was transfixed by the vein at her neck, and the blood pulsing through it. The curse the forest had cast on him overwhelmed him, and the monster burst free. Seizing the maid, he bit deep into her throat, sucking down her blood greedily until his thirst was sated, and the girl hung dead in his arms. Horrified, Soldar hid the body and pretended nothing had happened, telling himself his memories were the product of a nightmare, nothing more. The queen also spent a disturbed night. She dreamed that her husband wasn't dead, only lost. He roamed the forest, calling for her. When she woke, she told Soldar of her dream and begged for a rescue party to be sent. Soldar refused to hear her entreaties and sent her away. In truth, he was afraid of what he'd done in the night and terrified of losing control again. Too late to stay his hand, now that he understood the consequences, he regretted his actions. Undeterred by his refusal and growing suspicious of her brother-in-law's strange moods, the queen took her children and headed to the forest. If Soldar wouldn't search for Torvan, then she would do so. If nothing else, a king deserved a king's burial. When their absence was discovered, Soldar fell into a rage. Terrified his evil would be discovered, he ordered the guards to find and bring back the royal family. When they were brought before him, tired and bedraggled by a fruitless search, the blood hunger rose in him once more. His fear and brutality burst from him. He blinded all three to ensure they could never again go looking for their husband and father, and so they would never see what he had done. Overnight, the atmosphere in the palace changed. The servants feared the new king, but they saw the punishment dealt out to the queen and the prince and princess, and none dared speak against him. Over the next few weeks, the bodies of several missing servants were discovered in the forest fringes, their throats torn as though by a savage animal. King Soldar angrily decreed that everyone remain in the palace for their own safety, but that didn't solve the problem. Each week, servants went missing, and each week more bodies were discovered. It was clear that a monster was at large, but although guards searched the forest close to the palace, no monster could be found. The queen was driven half-mad by the loss of both her husband and her sight, whilst the young prince and princess felt the change in the atmosphere of the palace. In their hearts, they knew their uncle was behind the violence that had begun after their father's death, and they determined to bring the false king to justice for the evils he'd done. When it was new moon and the sky was dark enough to hide them, the queen and her children once more escaped and fled to the northern forests. Heading deep into the woods, the queen stumbled upon what she most longed and dreaded to find, the body of King Torvan. The queen fell to her knees, gathering her beloved husband's body onto her lap, tears flowing from her sightless eyes. She wept so long a puddle formed around her, and so piteously that the magic of the forest was stirred to act once more. The queen was transformed into a river, flowing eternally over rocks formed from the body of her beloved husband. The orphaned prince and princess wept bitterly at the loss of both parents. The magic that lived in the forest took pity on their sorrow. A storm blew up to hide them from the guards King Soldar sent after them. As snow fell around them, drifts formed to cover them both. The brother and sister clung to each other for comfort. Their tears formed chips of ice which fell as fast as the snow itself. They settled on a bed of ice beneath a canopy of snow, and the forest's magic lulled them to sleep. The new king sent guards in pursuit of the queen and her children, but they were unable to find them, beaten back by the unforgiving cold. Fury consumed the king, feeding the monster inside him, until there was no way back to the man he had once been. King Soldar rules to this day, drinking the blood of his servants, his terrified court huddled around him, trapped by the same magic that trapped the traitor prince. 2 stories are told about the young prince and princess. One says their magical sleep granted them eternal rest, and they slumber to this day, waiting to be awoken when they will take their rightful places on the throne. The other story is told by trappers from the forests in the north of Nordin, who believe the children were also granted immortality. They claim that on dark nights, the cries of King Torvan's children can still be heard as they roam the wastes seeking their lost parents. Ice storms their tears, and the bitter wind their cries of grief and loss. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. I always love spending time in the Firethorn Kingdoms. There will be another story posted up for you next week. Until then, take care.